Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda and I did something for the first time this year. Well, for 2024, because you will be seeing this in 2025. I am filming it on December 27th of 2024, but I actually did best of the year lists and I have two. I have nonfiction and fiction. As I said, filming this in December right now. I'm doing fiction today because I'm pretty set on my list, my top 10 for fiction. I am currently reading a nonfiction that might break into the top 10, so I'm waiting for a little bit to do that video. But I wanted to go through the top 10 books, top 10 novels that I read this year. So a couple caveats. One, no rereads. And two, these are not books necessarily published in 2024, but they're books that I've read for the first time in 2024. So let's get started. At number 10, I have 1,000 Ships, which I loaned to my daughter, and look what she did, by Natalie Haynes. This is her retelling of the Trojan War, probably the aftermath of the Trojan War. It's the first Natalie Haynes that I had actually read, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I have since kind of become a Natalie Haynes girly. I think I've listened to all of her podcasts that's come out so far. So I'm just waiting for the new season, but I just loved this. You know, she puts women at the center. When I was telling my husband about this when I was reading it, he said, there's no women in the Trojan War. And my daughter pointed out, the war was literally fought over a woman. So there were women in the Trojan War. Yeah, you don't have to know the history necessarily to, sorry, my list kind of went off here. You don't necessarily have to be really up on your Greek history. It's fine. You can follow it without that. So 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. And number 9, I have an e-copy, so I'll just put the picture up here. And this was a little bit of a surprise for me. And this was The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. So I loved Hamnet. And I read Hamnet shortly before The Marriage Portrait was released. And then when The Marriage Portrait was released, I immediately put it on pre-order for my Kobo. But then a lot of people were reading it and saying that it wasn't working for them. So I kind of put it off in the back, not worried about it. And then one of my book clubs decided to do The Marriage Portrait. So I had a copy, I'm gonna read it. And I ended up really, really loving this book. Hamnet still probably edges this one out a little bit, but this was really worked for me. I do think had I read it when it came out, I probably would not have liked it as much because I would have still had Hamnet in my mind. So I'm glad that I had a lot of time between the two. Not that the books are especially similar, but, and it might be because they weren't especially similar that it would have maybe not worked as well for me. But this was the story of a Florentine, I think she was Florentine, noble girl, actually. She was like 13 or 14 and she's married off to a duke, and within a year she's dead. That's a true story. And for a long time it was suspected that her husband had killed her. Historically, that's been disproven, so in reality, but this book kind of looks like what might have happened. And I don't want to get too far into it because I think you should read it. If you like historical fiction, it's Maggie O'Farrell just is such a lovely writer. This book surprised me, and it surprised me. I really thought I was going to get something, and then I got something else, and I always appreciate it when that happens. I do know that some people didn't like the end, but the end is what kind of made it for me, so I think that's to each their own sort of thing. Really loved it. I think I might own all of Maggie O'Farrell's books in various formats. So I'm definitely going to try to become an O'Farrell completist. So far, I've only read 3. Hamnet, The Marriage Portrait, and I am. There, I said that right. So that was number 9. Number 8 was this one, also a surprise to me. Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian. So this is horror and a Western. And it's not like a Western with horror elements or horror with Western elements. It is a Western and it is horror. And it's set in Kansas, and people are going to go out and go witch hunting. So it's about the witch, and really well written. Truly, if I watched this on the screen, it would scare the poop out of me. It just would. Really creepy, well done characters. I went into this wanting that Western and/or horror And I should say, I wanted both experiences when I read this book. I read it for June on the Range, and I got both of those experiences, which I really appreciated. And I think that's really a hard thing to pull off. This is there's at least a sequel coming out to this, which is coming out in 2025. However, it's not going to be a Western. I can just tell from the description of it, it's not a Western, but I am looking forward to the same kind of horror things in it. And there are some really creepy things in this book. I really had a great time with this one. Then another one that I have on Kobo, and that is The Pearl by John Steinbeck, which I read with Mariandria at Books and Bocadillos. I don't know how I got to this point in my life without reading The Pearl. I mean, it's one of those books I think everybody reads in school, and somehow I didn't. And it's very short. It is an allegory, a fable, so go into it with those expectations, but it just really hits home. It really hits home, and in such short amount of space, Steinbeck's able to pack such a punch. And I can see why it is such a classic. My screen keeps going off, sorry. Steinbeck is just a master. I have read 3 of his books so far. Again, I'll probably end up reading all of them, but I read Travels with Charlie, East of Eden, and now The Pearl. And they've all been 5-star books for me. John Steinbeck and he's very accessible. I think I've always been a little scared of him, and there's really no reason to be. He's pretty easy to read, and just sort of the language wise, and his characters are so good. So good. So yeah, The Pearl. That was number 7. Number 6 is another one of those books, like The Marriage Portrait, that sat on my shelves for far too long. And this is Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. And really, I have Olive at a Book Olive to thank about this, because she said this is her favorite book and she reads it every June. I can't remember if I read it in June or not, but I read it somewhere around there. And this was the only Towles book that I had not read. And I wanted to read it because in his short fiction collection, it's not really a short story, but short fiction collection, Table for Two, which I still have to read, there's a story about one of the characters in here. And I buddy read this with Kim at Kim's Book Life. So this will be special to me because that was one of the books we read together, and Kim has passed on. So I will think of her when I look at this book. But this is a fun book set in the 30s, going into World War II. And it's just about a young woman and the friends that she makes in New York. Great characters, told as only Amor Towles can. I think Amor Towles is really going to be, if you look at authors these days who are going to be, the greats of this time period. And there are a number on this list. It will probably be that way. If you look, I think Amor Towles is definitely going to be one of those. So yeah, really enjoyed this. I have now read all of his novels, so I have not yet read Table for Two, but I have read Rules of Civility, Gentleman in Moscow, and The Lincoln Highway, and this is my favorite, which surprised me. And thank you, Olive, to a Book Olive, for getting me to read that one. Number 5 is one that I don't have because I got it from the library, and this one I heard about from Roz at Scally Danding about the books. So I got it like pretty much right after she talked about it, and so it was before a lot of people started reading it, or I should say more people started reading it, because I really think more people need to read this book because it's a really great book. It's called Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. So it's a little bit of a strange book in that there's things in it that are really funny, but the story itself is not funny. It's written, so it's set after the Peloponnesian Wars. They're in Syracuse. Syracuse is on Sicily, which I did not know that, after the war. And the Athenian prisoners are kept in this like gravel pit. And people just go and like look at them for fun, I guess. And these two guys decide that they want to see some Athenian theater, and this is their chance to see it. So they kind of make the prisoners do theater for them and do Euripides. You don't necessarily need to know Euripides to read this book. And so there's some very funny things about this book. In some ways, it reminded me kind of the same sense of humor, although not to the same hilarity level, of Lamb by Christopher Moore. But that kind of belies the story. I think the story itself is very heartbreaking, but it also has this element that I thought was so important at the time that I read it, and I still think is very important, is, you know, you look at places that are in conflict and you forget that there's humans behind it. And just because someone is on the other side of that conflict doesn't mean they're any less human than you are. And I was really put in mind of what was going on in Palestine and Gaza for that, because I just was. I don't know why that one more than, say, Ukraine popped into my mind, but that's kind of how I felt like this. We need to be able to look past our conflict. Obviously, once the conflict's going on, you can't really do it. But when we get to the point where the conflict has ceased, or at least the pew-pew part of the conflict has passed, we need to be able to look at those people not as enemies, but as fellow humans. And that's what I really loved about this book. Okay. And now number 4, I can't tell you that much about, and that is The Plover by Brian Doyle. The reason I can't tell you that much about it is this is the follow-up to Mink River, which is my favorite book. But if I were to tell you anything about this book, it would spoil a major part of Mink River. So I will talk in very vague terms about this one. This is a sort of a maritime adventure story with some elements of magical realism. I went into this book expecting to like it. I did not go into it expecting to love it. Still, Mink River is still my favorite book, but this definitely is up there. Brian Doyle is just a wonderful writer. I have some of his books. I need to read more of his books. I did recently get, on the suggestion of Michael Clark and also my friend Karen, I got the Book of Uncommon Prayer, which is not really a book you just read through. So, I mean, like, read it, like, read. Just kind of, and I've been reading that, like, now and then. Wonderful. But I just wish you would all read something by Brian Doyle to kind of understand what I'm talking about, because I can't explain it as well as just you reading it. Now, I would recommend Mink River. I will say I would recommend with some reservations Mink River, just because Mink River is such a there are personal reasons why it was such a wonderful book for me, in that it's set in my favorite place, a place that I know. It's set in Oregon, all these sorts of things. This one is not really an Oregon-based one because it's a maritime adventure. It's out there. So, but yeah, still elements of magical realism in it. I don't really feel like you have to read Mink River to read this one, but I do think if you read Mink River, you're going to want to read this one, because it will give you some closure to one of the plot lines. We're in our top 3, and here I have a repeat author. And I really, when this author was earlier on the list, or farther down on the list, I really debated whether or not I should include that book. And I decided I just kept looking at the list. I'm like, that book needs to be on the list, and this needs to be on the list at number 3. And that is Stoneblind by Natalie Haynes. So this is her retelling of the Medusa myth. And it's got a feminist bent. This is a really nice, pristine copy, because I did not actually read this copy. I listened to the audiobook, which is, I think, the way to go. But I love this book so much, I had to get the print book too. It is narrated by Natalie Haynes, which I'm always a little worried when authors of fiction narrate their books. It's not always. I mean, sometimes it works really well, but it's a little iffier. And she's one where I will listen to her books when she narrates it. I have been listening to her podcast, so I'm used to hearing her voice and the way she tells stories. So it's great to hear it. But this is just a heartbreakingly beautiful book. It's also very funny. It was funnier than I expected it to be. Some people have expressed maybe a dissatisfaction with the fact that maybe it focuses a bit more on the gods and less on Medusa. I thought that there was a good balance. That was just my personal take of it. But yeah, so definitely Stoneblind. And I'm just waiting for my daughter to read it, because I think she'll really love it. Number 2. This was another buddy read with Mariandria. And this book, I loved this book. Willa Cather's Death Comes for the Archbishop. So this book is set in the American Southwest, and it's kind of spanning the time from right when the territory was acquired to the United States for several decades after that. And we follow 2 priests who become archbishops from France who come over as missionaries, and their experience, we focus on one of them, and it's really his experience of being in the Southwest as things are changing, as that particular world is changing and what stays the same. And I'll admit, missionary kind of scares me. scared me, I should say. But this is not a book that colonizes at the best. I mean, it really respects the native cultures there. The character respects the native cultures. And she really brings that to life just beautifully. And what drew me to this book is its setting. So I thought when I picked it up, it was set in Arizona because this looks like San Javier del Bac in Tucson. It is not, although that is referenced in this book, but takes place in New Mexico, which is close to Arizona. But I know Arizona pretty well, and because I go there every year. She got it. She got it. I felt like I was in Arizona reading this book. It's just so breathtakingly beautiful. Yeah, that comes from the Archbishop, and she's turned me into a Cather girl. And finally, my number one book of the year, and I kind of feel weird saying drum roll because this is probably like the least surprising number one book of the year for this year, because I think it's good. It's going to be on a lot of people's top 10 lists, and probably a lot of people's in the first space in top 10 lists. But that, of course, is James by Percival Everett. This is a retelling, a reimagining. I'm not sure how you would exactly describe it, but Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Now, I did read Huckleberry Finn shortly before reading this book. I don't like Huckleberry Finn. I don't like that book. I think the middle is very mushy. So just as a structure of a book, I don't like it because I just think the middle is, I never, once you get past this whole thing with like the Duke and the Prince or the King or whatever, I don't know. It never picks up like it should. And then it ends kind of abruptly for my taste. But my biggest problem with Huckleberry Finn was the way Jim is treated in that book because he's so infantilized. I knew a book written in that period of time would have some racial issues. I just knew it would. And honestly, I think Mark Twain was ahead of his time writing about racial issues at that time. Doesn't change the fact that James is infantilized in that book. And that's what really drove me crazy. Jim is infantilized in the book, which really drove me crazy. So this is the answer to it. And I would almost tell people, like if someone's saying, I should read Huckleberry Finn, I would almost tell them to read this instead. Michael T, my English teacher who assigned this, and I never assigned Huck Finn, and I never, probably come kill me if you heard me say that. But this book really, it answers the things that I found problematic with Huck Finn, the infantilization and why that's there. So this is what I would say. I would say, if you're going to read both of them, I would say read this one first, because I think that the things that I found very frustrating in Huckleberry Finn are explained in this book, so they won't be frustrating to you, if that makes sense. But all from James. Also, no mushy middle. No mushy middle. Now, I will say in Huck Finn, in mushy middle, that's a part of the book where there's not a lot of Jim. So Jim does other things, which is why the middle isn't mushy. Really, really loved this book. It was my first Percival Everett. It will not be my last Percival Everett. And it's a case of a book that surpasses the hype. And there's a lot of hype about this book, and it surpassed it. So I read it at the height of the hype, and I still loved it. So that is my book of the year. If you are friends with me on my personal Facebook, you already know this list. You probably already know my nonfiction list too, because I'm sharing it there first. But yeah, that's your sneak preview. And by the way, if you know me well enough to know my last name and I would recognize you, feel free to send me a friend request. You can find me on Facebook. Feel free to send me a friend request. Just, as long as I know who you are and you can find me, that's fine. I will. And then you can see all the silly memes I post. But anyway, that is my top 10 fiction of the year. Again, nonfiction as of today, December 27th, is still in progress. So we'll see how that one turns out. I think the top three are pretty set, but we'll see. The nonfiction I'm reading now is pretty impressive, so we'll see. Anyway, there you go. Let me know what your top book of the year was and why was it James? I shouldn't say that. Anyway, yes, let me know what your favorite books of the year were. And subscribe, join my Discord, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.